Hello and welcome. Today I'm talking about the legends of mermaids. With nearly 3/4 of the earth covered by water, it's little wonder that centuries ago the oceans were believed to contain many mysterious creatures, including sea serpents and mermaids. Merfolk are, of course, only the marine version of half-human, half-animal legends that have captured human imagination for ages. Traditions concerning creatures half-human and half-fish in form have existed for thousands of years, and the Babylonian deity Era, the fish god, is represented on seals and in scripture as being in this shape over 2,000 years BC. He is usually depicted as having a bearded head with a crown and a body like a man, but from the waist downwards he has the shape of a fish covered with scales and a tail. This is according to The Mystery and Lore of Monsters by C.J.S. Thompson. Greek mythology contains stories of the god Triton, the merman messenger of the sea, and several modern religions, including Hinduism and Candomblé, an African Brazilian belief system, worship mermaid goddesses to this day. In folklore, mermaids were often associated with bad luck and misfortune. They lured errant sailors off course and even onto rocky shoals, much like their cousins, the sirens, beautiful, alluring, half-bird, half-women who dwelled near rocky cliffs and sung to passing sailors. The sirens would enchant men to steer their ships toward the singing and the dangerous rocks that were sure to sink them. Homer's Odyssey, written around 800 BC, tales of the brave Ulysses, whose naked ears were tortured by the sweet sounds of the sirens. And other legends, from Scotland and Wales, for example, mermaids befriended and even married humans. There are many legends about mermaids, and even a few dozen historical claims of supposedly real mermaid sightings. Hundreds of years ago, sailors and residents in coastal towns around the world told of encounters with sea maidens. One story, dating back to the 1600s, claimed that a mermaid had entered Holland through a dike and was injured in the process. She was taken to a nearby lake and was soon nursed back to health. She eventually became a productive citizen, learned to speak Dutch, performed household chores, and converted to Catholicism. Another supposed mermaid encounter is described in Edward Snow's Incredible Mysteries and Legends of the Sea. A sea captain off the coast of Newfoundland described his 1614 encounter. Captain John Smith saw a mermaid swimming about with all possible grace. He pictured her as having large eyes, a finely shaped nose that was somewhat short, and well-formed ears that were rather too long. Smith goes on to say that her long green hair imparted to her an original character that was by no means unattractive. In fact, Smith was so taken with this lovely woman that he began to experience the first effects of love as he gazed at her before his sudden realization that she was a fish from the waist down. By the 1800s, hoaxers churned out fake mermaids by the dozen to satisfy the public's interest in the creatures. The great showman P.T. Barnum was well aware of the public's interest in mermaids and, in the 1840s, displayed the Fiji mermaid, which became one of his most popular attractions. People paying 50 cents hoping to see a long-limbed, fish-tailed beauty comb her hair were surely disappointed. Instead, they saw a grotesque, fake corpse a few feet long. It had the head, torso, and limbs of a monkey, and the bottom part of a fish. To all modern eyes, it was an obvious fake, but it fooled and intrigued many people at the time. Could there be a scientific basis for any of the mermaid stories? Some researchers believe that sightings of human-sized ocean animals, such as manatees and dugongs, might have inspired merfolk legends. These animals have a flat tail and two flippers that resemble stubby arms, traits that may make them resemble merfolk. They don't look exactly like typical mermaids or mermen, of course, but many sightings were from quite a distance away, and since they were mostly submerged in water and waves, only parts of their bodies were visible. A glimpse of a head, arm, or tail just before it dives under the waves might have spawned at least some mermaid reports. Modern mermaid reports are very rare, but they do occur. For example, news reports in 2009 claimed that a mermaid had been sighted off the coast of Israel in the town of Kiryat Yam. She performed a few tricks for onlookers just before sunset, then disappeared for the night. One of the first people to see the mermaid, Shlomo Cohen, said, "I was with friends when suddenly we saw a woman laying on the sand in a weird way. At first, I thought she was just another sunbather, but when we approached, she jumped into the water and disappeared. We were all in shock because we saw she had a tail." Legends of mermaids may be ancient, but they are still present in many forms. The history of opium goes back to ancient times, when the drug was used for ritual purposes and for anesthesia. The ancient Egyptians, Indians, and Romans used opium as a pain reliever and often included the drug in surgical procedures to keep pain at bay. The drug is even mentioned in medical texts from the ancient world that date back to the times and writings of Dioscorides, Galen, and Avicenna. An opium den was an establishment where opium was sold and smoked. Opium dens were prevalent in many parts of the world in the 19th century, most notably China, Southeast Asia, North America, and France. Throughout the West, opium dens were frequented by and associated with the Chinese because the establishments were usually run by Chinese who supplied the opium as well as prepared it for visiting non-Chinese smokers. Most opium dens kept a supply of opium paraphernalia, such as the specialized pipes and lamps that were necessary to smoke the drug. Patrons would recline in order to hold the long opium pipes over oil lamps that would heat the drug until it vaporized, allowing the smoker to inhale the vapors. Opium dens in China were frequented by all levels of society, and their opulence or simplicity reflected the financial means of the patrons. In urban areas of the United States, particularly on the West Coast, there were opium dens that mirrored the best to be found in China, with luxurious trappings and female attendants. For the working class, there were also many low-end dens with sparse furnishings. These latter dens were more likely to admit non-Chinese smokers. Opium smoking arrived in North America with the large influx of Chinese who came to participate in the California gold rush. The jumping-off point for the gold fields was San Francisco, and the city's Chinatown became the site soon after the first Chinese arrived around 1850. By the 1870s, San Francisco's opium dens attracted non-Chinese residents, and the problem of opium addiction was acknowledged by the city at large. In 1878, the city of San Francisco passed its first anti-opium ordinance. In the early 20th century, huge bonfires, fueled by confiscated opium and opium paraphernalia, were used to destroy opium and create a public venue to discuss opium use. Due to opium eradication campaigns, smoking opium was driven underground and was still fairly common in San Francisco and other cities in North America until around World War II. A typical opium den in San Francisco might be a Chinese-run laundry that had a basement, back room, or upstairs room that was tightly sealed to keep drafts from making the opium lamps flicker or allowing the telltale fumes of opium to escape. A photograph of one luxurious opium den in 19th century San Francisco has survived, taken by I.W. Tabor in 1886. But the majority of the city's wealthy opium smokers, both Chinese and American, shunned public opium dens in favor of smoking in the privacy of their own homes. The opium dens of New York City's Chinatown, due to its geographical distance from China, were not as opulent as some of those to be found on the American West Coast. According to H. Kane, a doctor who spent years studying opium use in New York in the 1870s and 1880s, the most popular opium dens were located on Mott and Pell Streets in Chinatown. At the time, all the city's opium dens were run by Chinese, except for one on 23rd Street that was run by an American woman and her 2 daughters. Kane remarked that New York's opium dens were one place where all nationalities seem indiscriminately mixed. As in San Francisco, New Yorkers of all races would come to Chinatown to patronize its opium dens. New York City's last known opium den was raided and shut down on June 28, 1957. Historically, opium was used for recreational purposes during the 15th century, but because it was a rare drug that carried a rather high expense, this use was limited. The use of opium would not become a more regular part of Chinese history until the 17th century, when the drug became more widely available. During this time, opium was mixed with tobacco and smoked throughout China, and opium addiction was first being noticed. The British encouraged Chinese opium use in order to increase the balance of trading they had with China. As a result, the British would deliver opium from India to China openly. The cultivation of opium, or of the poppy plant in India, was governed by the British under the East India Company. The government agency would supervise and oversee the production and shipment of opium for many years. In 1839, as well as in 1858, massive confiscation of opium by the Chinese emperor, who wished to stop the opium deliveries, led to 2 opium wars. At that time, opium was traded all over the country by the British, and opium use would continue to be widespread in domestic production. Ultimately, more than 25% of all Chinese men would be opium consumers by the early 1900s. It wasn't until the late 19th century that opium use for recreational purposes affected other nations. In time, global regulation of the drug would begin, but this action would not fully take place until after the 1870s, when town ordinances were created in San Francisco, California, and other areas. In 1909, the International Opium Commission was formed to further regulate opium. The 20th century brought major changes as opium was prohibited from many countries. This regulation would greatly reduce the level of opium use, but it would also lead to what is now modern production of the drug for illicit street purposes. Tight regulatory practices keep opium that is used to develop legal prescription drugs under check as well. Today, opium production is dominated by Afghanistan, but the level of production is significantly less than it once was. Absinthe, the symbol of transformation. The green fairy isn't just another name for absinthe. She is a metaphorical concept of artistic enlightenment and exploration, of poetic inspiration, of a freer state of mind, of new ideas, of a changing social order. To the ignorant drunk, absinthe will forever remain but potent alcohol, perhaps with a bit of high thrown in. To the original Bohemians of 1890s Paris, the fairy was a welcomed symbol of transformation. She was the trusted guide en route to artistic innovation. She was the symbol of thirst for life to Arthur Rimbaud, the first punk poet. It was the fairy who guided him and his fellow poet and partner, Paul Verlaine, on their quest to escape the conventional reality of their time into the sanctuary of the surreal. Transformation has always been the fundamental essence of the green fairy, for transformation is what she provides on several parallels. During the magical ritual of La Louche, the drink itself first transforms from the concentrated, alcohol-rich, deep emerald green color into an alluring, opalescent, cloudy greenish-white mixture. This, of course, is symbolic of the subsequent transformation that shall take place in the drinker's mind, as the cool water liberates the power of wormwood oil and the other herbal ingredients from the green concentrate. So will new ideas, concepts, and notions be set free in the mind of the drinker, be he a poet, an artist, a scientist, or the common man on the street. Apparently so, anyway. The green fairy is the goddess of artistic rebellion. Let there be no doubt that the turn of the last 2 centuries produced art, poetry, and ideas that were, for their time, shockingly original, rebellious, and challenging to the extreme. This was the time of Rimbaud and Verlaine, who pursued their quest of challenging convention whenever they came across it. Their antics caused outrage across Europe at the time, but their ingenious poetry, a reflection of their search for the true meaning of life, remains with us to this day. Inspiring and liberating, the Green Fairy was a powerful symbol of the avant-garde elite that gathered in Parisian cafes at the turn of the last 2 centuries. In this sense, the fairy was what pot later became to the hippie subculture of the 1960s. In her company, or under her influence, belly puck writers and artists became lucid commentators on an emerging new world. With the stroke of a brush or a pen, they experimented, they rebelled, they provoked, and so they successfully subverted the stuffy conventions of the time. The effects of absinthe are many, and some quite inexplicable. As all fans of the special green liquor know, this truly is a drink in its own class, and we are not talking about absinthe's fascinating history or its romantic connections to the art world. This time, we are talking about the phenomenal effects of absinthe on a drinker's mental faculties and sense of reality. This time, we are talking about the absinthe effects on the mind. The clear-headed form of inebriation, so odd for a drink that typically contains between 50 and 70% of alcohol, never fails to surprise those who reach for a glass for the first time. People always remark how odd it is. They expect to feel drunk, as they would on any other spirit, but it doesn't work quite in the usual way with absinthe. Somehow, absinthe just has a different effect on people. Maybe it is a kind of drunkenness, but it's a weird kind of drunkenness, with this bizarre clarity of thought that comes with it. Arthur Rimbaud, the famous French poet, sipped the green drink to liberate the sacred thing, his mind, as he daydreamed voyages of discovery that nobody had heard of, and every kind of magic. Ernest Hemingway called absinthe brain-warming, idea-changing liquid alchemy. Many other artists and writers regularly enjoyed the company of the Green Fairy in search of inspiration. Drinking absinthe, it seems, does have the perplexing effects of illuminating the mind. As a metaphorical creature locked within a bottle of absinthe, the Green Fairy continues to earn her reputation as the artist's muse all over the world. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and please view my shop for absinthe-inspired products. Have a wonderful evening. Blessed be.